Bun găsit, doamnelor și domnilor, sunt Marius Constantinescu și începem astăzi un nou sezon al emisiunii Ediție Limitată, colecția de interviuri premium de pe TVR Cultural. Mă bucur să deschidem această serie nouă cu o autentică personalitate internațională, istoricul britanic Sebag Montefiore. Cea mai recentă apariție a lui Sebag Montefiore este Lumea, o istorie de familie, o privire monumentală asupra istoriei umanității. Sebag Montefiore a venit la București în decembrie 2024, grație editurii 3, care traduce și publică acest titlu în limba română, ocazie pentru mine de a-l invita la interviul pe care îl urmăriți, unul foarte actual, inclusiv în context social și politic românesc. Simon, thank you so much for accepting this interview for the Romanian National Television. It's a pleasure to have you as our guest. And I would start by saying that you shifted in a definitive manner the way we read and also the way we learn history. So my first question is this: was history your most favorite or your least favorite class in school?
It was my most favorite. I mean, I loved English literature. Those are my two favorites for sure. And I always wanted to write history books, but also fiction. And I enjoyed studying it. But it really came from my parents. They loved books and they loved reading. So some of this is predestined.
As a matter of fact, I would say there is no better fiction than history itself.
That's true. The best stories, of course, are in history, are in reality, because you simply couldn't invent them. And if you turn them into fiction, you'd have to sort of tone them down a little bit. But that's because human nature, human character, is so strange and so bizarre and so complicated. And that's the great fascination of history.
Your latest book, The World, A Family History of Humanity, sees the humankind through this lens of the family. Of course, there was an initial one, an archetypal family. Then there were thousands and dozens of thousands afterwards. The sole idea of family has the cohesion at its core. Then why are we more divided than ever?
Well, I mean, the family is a great way of telling world history. World history is a great way of looking at the world, especially in turbulent times like we are now. In some ways, it's a medicine for turbulent times because there's always been worse times in the past that we can compare with. But on the family, you know, the great thing about family is there are so many different definitions of the family. But one thing stays the same, whether our times are divided or not, the family is always the basic unit of human life. And that's why it's a great focus or lens through which to see human history, to survey the human story. And that's what I've done in this book.
Well, speaking about turbulent times, you have written this book in the middle of living history, I would say. The pandemic on one hand, and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the other hand. How did these two alter your writing process?
I started writing it during the COVID pandemic. It's the most insanely ambitious book on earth, and I was never sure that I could really begin it, yet alone finish it. But during the COVID pandemic, which was a tragic time for many people, it was a very good time for writers. And so I lived in total isolation, and I wrote the whole book in those 3 years. And of course, the background of pandemics affected the book. You know, one of the things that this book is a history of pandemics and plagues and diseases,
exactly.
And a history of medical care and how the huge medical changes of the 19th century really made possible the giant exponential population growth of the 20th century. But at the same time, the Russian invasion happened during this period. Of course, I realized that that was a very good place to finish the book. And so it ends with the Russian tanks pouring into Ukraine. And that's a great place to end a world history, because it was one of those moments that changed or defined a new era of world history. I could also have ended it on October the 7th with the Hamas attack on Israel. That would also have worked. But the Russian one came first, and it's a very good place to look at the new world order, and that's what I do. I finished the book with the Russian invasion, and then I have a conclusion which really looks at what's happening in the future and what's next. And many of the things I predicted 2 years ago when I wrote it are happening, I'm afraid, in a very intense and accelerated manner.
Russia has always been a field of expertise and of interest for you. Why is that?
Well, I think because my Jewish family came from Russia, and they left Russia after the pogroms in 1904. Yes. So they came to Ireland and then England, and so I was always grown up knowing that we had a sort of connection to the Russian Empire. We came from parts of Odessa. Some family came from Odessa in Ukraine, some from what is now Poland, and some from Lithuania, and some from Moscow also. So we had family all throughout the Russian Empire. And so I was always fascinated with that as a child. And that started me reading about Russia. And of course, when the Soviet Union began to fall apart, I immediately went out there to see what was happening.
This is a monumental book, and you must be counting on a very dedicated reader now that the attention span is lower than 3 minutes. So
well, that's right. I mean, with this book, I wanted to write this book, and I'm so glad I did, because I think, the written word is still the place to learn history. And there's a huge fashion now for podcasts where you can listen to this sort of history in 20-minute bites, which is very popular. But I find that I love podcasts, but the trouble with that genre is it's a bit like having a conversation in a pub with someone about history, and you finish the conversation. What do you know for certain at the end of it? While with the written word, I still think history books are the finest way to really learn history and understand it. As for this book, it's as long as it can be, because I was always reacting to those many books, the short history of art,
abridged history.
There are many abridged histories, and again, a bit like the podcast, these short histories are valuable, but only of limited value, because the God is in the details, and it's only by really going into something that you understand it. So this book is deliberately a deliberate idea of this book is to combine the span of world history with the intimacy of biography. And that's what this is. You don't have to read the whole book at the same time.
Exactly. One can read it from a whole breath, let's say. Why not?
Yes.
And other one can read it bits by bits, return to some episodes or some chapters. Why not?
Exactly. I mean, some people start at the end, some people start at the beginning. It's written to be read all the way through, but you can also treat it like a box of chocolates. You can even close your eyes and put your hand in and come out with a chocolate and try it. But if you want to start anywhere in the middle, the best place to start is in Baghdad in 800 AD with the court of Harun al-Rashid and the 1001 Nights.
Yes.
That's a fun place to start if you want to start in the middle. So it's very relaxing. But also, I would say, it's a beautiful thing to have.
It is.
It's a beautiful possession. And the publishers have made it so beautiful.
There is something irresistibly human-scaled in your epic historical fresco, I would say. And it's this intimacy that connects us to the past and the present, no matter how far they actually are. Do you believe in history with capital H?
I don't know what the capital H means. You'll have to tell me. But I mean, I believe in both histories, I guess. History as an intimate voyage through human experience.
Exactly.
And history as the Marxist idea of history as an evolution through certain stages. But what I don't believe is confining or distorting history into any particular ideology. And that is the danger. We just have to realize that people in history were similar to us in many ways, but in other ways were so foreign to us, so bizarre in their beliefs, that we can't hope to completely understand them. And one has to approach history with that sort of humility.
For many years, it's been said that history is written by the winners. Was it your duty as a historian to give voice to the vanquished too?
Yeah, I mean, the whole point about this history is this is a world history, not like the sort of world histories we read when we were young, where much of it was about the Roman Empire and not much, and the British Empire and the Russian Empire and not much else. We called them global, but actually there was nothing about Southern Asia, South America, Africa at all, really. And this is very different. And the whole fun of this book is that I treat the rulers of West Africa, kings of the South Seas, rulers in India or China or Iran, Afghanistan, exactly as I would treat the rulers of the great powers of Germany or Britain or Russia. So this is really a kind of post-great power history. I mean, all the great empires are in here, but there are also many, many countries that you wouldn't expect. Romania, for example, plays quite a big role in here. Albania does too. Georgia does, one of my favorite countries that I also know well. And you'll find Hawaii and Cambodia and Haiti in this book, which you wouldn't normally find in a world history. And that's deliberate, because it's not just a victor's history. It's not just about the big empires. They're all in there, of course, as well. But the whole point is it's also about small countries that interest me for some reason or other. And Poland, of course, is in there, and Lithuania. You have to make decisions in each part of the world. You can't put everything in. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, do I put Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia or Thailand? Well, I chose Cambodia because it was the one that interested me most. In this part of the world, do I have Bulgaria? Do I have Hungary? Do I have Romania? I chose Romania, luckily, since we're here. So this has quite a lot of Romanian history in it from all different parts of Romanian history, and that's a deliberate decision, partly because I like being in Romania, partly because I've read a lot about it. And so the whole point is it's truly global. I mean, there's a lot about Iran, there's a lot about Arabia in this book, for example, which are very relevant today, and Afghanistan. So yeah, I mean, it's got to have the real span of a real world history.
One of the phrases that open up the book, it's this one, and I quote, "Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter," said the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe. It's one of the mottos of your book, and I find it really, really epitomizing the core of the book.
Yeah, because Africa is so often left out of these histories. But in fact, Euro-Asia-Africa or Afro-Eurasia was always a unit from very, very early in world history. Not all of Africa, but North Africa. And so from the very beginning, I have a lot of African history. In my Roman period, I have Numidia and Mauritania, for example. These are kingdoms that most people don't know about. So there's always African history, but so often it's been reduced just to slavery. And in some ways, that's a danger of the new history, the new decolonization history, because it reduces it so much to West Africa. That's the history of slavery, because of the connection with the Americas and US history. And I want it to be much more than that. I mean, there is a lot of slavery in the book, but it's much more than that. And here you'll find the history of Africa is not just about the colonization and decolonization. It's much wider and deeper.
Since we are talking about a world history, there can be no absolute or definitive point of view. How does your voice multiply itself in order to become a choir of opinions or a polyphony of insights?
Well, what you don't want is what we were talking about a minute ago, is like, you don't want this book to be purely a Marxist history, purely an imperialist history, or purely a decolonization history, because each of these has some benefits, but is completely wrong if you try and squeeze all of human history into those straitjackets of ideology. And so in each case, I've read widely, and rather than boring the reader with endless historiographical debates among usually furious academics, I've read everything and made a decision of which line is the right line to take. I mean, this is a book to be read by general readers. It's written, like all my books, to be one, accurate,
Yes.
two, reflect the latest scholarship, but three, to be read and enjoyed by anybody.
Yeah.
And you don't have to know any history of any country to read this book. The only thing is that it's a very large book. Don't let that put you off, because it doesn't read like a large book once you're in it, and that's the whole point. It's to be enjoyed. It's a feast of history.
Your book teaches me another thing, that one cannot make it in history on her or his own. I mean, solitude, loneliness, not being affiliated, not belonging, seem to reject posterity. Do you have examples of world leaders on their own?
The book is full of loners, and many world leaders had very few friends, in fact, if that's what you mean. I mean, the world has changed by solitary thinkers who defy the conventions of their own time. Because so often the conventions of any particular time are soon disproven. And one has to realize that in making any decisions, and the politicians who are making decisions now, the historians who are making decisions now, this period in history, like all periods, judges all those before it as crazy, evil, misguided. And in fact, within a generation, our ideas will be regarded as crazy and misguided too. So this is part of what I call the humility of approaching history. A certain knowledge that we're just a moment in time, and that moment is filled with superstitions and bigotries that we don't even realize we possess. And so one has to step back from all of these periods and worlds that I cover in the book and realize that each of them is unique. We can know so much, but not everything.
But then again, you belong to a family or more families can create a dynasty. A dynasty can lead to power. If you don't belong to this formula, then what happens?
Well, I think all families are dynasties of some sort or another. I mean, people often say to me, like, but isn't this book just about the ruling families? And that's certainly true. I mean, it contains many ruling power families,
Yes.
that I call them. But those ruling families, many of them started from nowhere. The founder of the Ming dynasty in China, for example, literally was a beggar before he became an emperor, which is pretty fascinating. I mean, that's the most meteoric rise in the whole of world history, I think. But there are many others. But even if you're not a member of a power family, all families act in the same way. There are the same jealousies. And people love to say, when there's power and money involved, the rivalries are so much more brutal and jealous. But actually, it's not true. We all know from our own families that there are vicious jealousies and feuds in families where there is nothing to fight for. And so this is part of family life, and this is the reason that all family stories are so compelling to us, because they are literally familiar as well as familial. And when we look at the decadence, the rivalries, the brutal feudings of the Ottomans, the Hohenzollerns, whoever it is, we are in many ways seeing a sort of both a microcosm and an exaggerated version of those that we know so well in our own families. And that's the excitement of using family as a way to tell this story.
Ierusalim, Ecaterina cea Mare, Romanovii sau Stalin reprezintă doar câteva dintre zonele de expertiză maximă ale lui Simon Sebag Montefiore. Istoricul britanic are un doctorat în istorie obținut la Cambridge și a devenit nu doar personalitate de televiziune, dar și autor de bestselleruri de succes în întreaga lume, multe dintre ele încoronate și cu premii internaționale. What sort of taboos did you and your fellow historians dismantle along the years?
Well, I mean, we've dismantled the whole tradition of just really dealing with kind of northern Europe and the Americas. Yeah. You know, we removed the taboo of really ignoring slavery. But when we removed the taboo of slavery, mostly we were talking about North Atlantic slavery and Atlantic slavery, which involved the Americas and the slavery of the Spaniards and Portuguese and then the British and so on. I expanded that massively to look at history in all parts of the world, and therefore to look at slavery, which was in every part of the world until really recent modern times. Mm-hmm. So in this book you'll discover slavery trades that weren't just between the Americas, but were, for example, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in southern Russia, and so on. And then there are many others too, you know, about how you cover empires. And in this book, you'll see the advantages of empires, but also the tragedy and crimes of empires. And then, of course, there's another, which is like women are missing so much from many traditional histories. And this book is filled with women. And again, family is a very convenient way of looking at both men and women and children who are missing from so many histories. And all of them are in this book. So there are many taboos in here. I should add that the book is also often criticized for having too much sex and violence in it. And I plead guilty to this accusation. It does have a lot of sex and violence in it. Sex because it's part of human life.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of love in the book. There are a lot of love letters in the book and poetry. And violence. People say, why is there so much violence in the book? Well, we only have to look at our own times to see why that is the case. Because as you see from the Middle East today and Ukraine, it is in times of war that change happens exponential with enormous speed. And war is one of the super propellants of history. You know, as Lenin said, nothing happens for years, and then years happen in weeks. And we're seeing that now in the last year or two.
Yeah. There was not much talking about, like you said, sexuality, intimate life, family, habits, diseases, weaknesses, addictions of the significant historical figures, at least until a couple of decades ago. How do all these attributes alter the filter through which we see them?
Well, I think they just make them more human. And I'm not a very puritanical character. I'm not a very puritanical historian. And there are times when these sort of moral imperfections and peccadillos can make a difference to a character's politics, for example. But there are times when they don't. I mean, for example, Jack Kennedy is in this book, both, you know, as the son of Joe Kennedy, part of a great dynasty, and the liver of a notoriously debauched life, a womanizer, and we have him in all sorts of manifestations in the book. But as president, he performed very well. And as far as we can tell, despite health problems with his back, and also a very nepotistic presidency where his brother was his top minister as Attorney General, and not to speak of a very athletic sex life with people like Marilyn Monroe and many others. Despite all this, when it came to the big crisis of the Cuban Missile Crisis, he performed extremely well.
Coming back to this idea of family, what would you say that represents the snake that poisons and corrupts the whole idea of cohesion, and why?
I mean, the great challenge of our democracies today is to keep the cohesion that makes every member of the democracy, or a majority of the members of the democracy, feel that they have a stake in the system and in the state. And Rousseau said, you know, if people start to say that they don't care what happens to the state and have no stake in it, then the state is lost. And we are in danger of that in our democracies today. And you know, you in Romania are facing a very precipitous and dramatic presidential choice in this week when we're talking.
Yeah.
I don't know when this film is going to be shown, but
after.
After.
Yes.
Well, you may be breathing a sigh of relief.
We will have a new president when this interview will be aired.
Exactly. So who will that be? That's a fascinating question, and that will reflect some of the great choices. Now, one doesn't have to approach all these elections with despair. Sometimes, if one steps back, the election of a wild maverick can actually allow a democratic system to breathe. And actually, that is what democracies exactly are designed to do. Rather than having violent revolution, they are designed to allow a discontented minority or majority to express themselves and feel they are making a radical change without destroying the system and without violence. So sometimes one has to step back even if the result is not what you want and recognize that. But at the same time, a choice can also lead to the destruction of a system. And that comes about through the lack of asabiya, the Arabs call it, which is sort of cohesion, the links that hold together a system and a country. And there is a danger with our democracies that the overindulgence and entitlement of different interest groups, of different people with their rights, have forgotten that those rights are less important than the cohesion of the community. And so just as we face external threats from Russia, from China, from the autocracies, we also face maybe more grievous threats, maybe more dangerous threats from within. And the way to confront those is courage. Much of the rise of destructive, nihilistic mavericks in our democratic politics that threatens to destroy the democracies, much of it is really based on the fact that the establishments have failed to confront issues that normal people care about with honesty. And you see that most clearly in the Western democracies, in immigration, for example. I mean, most people care about immigration, but there has been, for decades, a conspiracy of silence where all the major parties refuse to discuss immigration because any discussion of immigration is accused of being racist. And so a certain ideology has distorted the honest discussion of an issue that will be the great issue of the 21st century. And one of the things I write about in this book is that migration creates societies, changes histories, causes massive changes to other countries, and the world is about to see even more intense migration as the states of North Africa, created after decolonization in the 60s, disintegrate, and more of the states of the Middle East become failed states. This is going to lead to a massive migration to the northern prosperous northern democracies like Romania, like Britain, like France, like America. And that's going to be the big challenge. So the failure to really confront it honestly and openly is exactly the sort of issue that is causing a massive breakdown of cohesion. And if the democratic parties can't overcome the rules of their political correctness to confront the issues that people really care about, then extreme leaders will come in and destroy the democracies. So this is an existential challenge.
You affirm actually that history becomes more inflammable due to digital distortions, and as we speak, Romania faces such a challenging situation. How dangerous this really is?
It's very dangerous. I mean, there's no doubt that the digital world, the internet, which we thought was going to so enlighten the world and illuminate knowledge, spread learning and equality, has done exactly the opposite. It's a good example, by the way, of how quickly the orthodoxies of one moment become the jokes, the farce of the next. And we're seeing that now. Yes, it's a huge danger because nothing can so destroy the cohesion, the respect and the trust that is the basis of free societies than the internet. And we haven't quite yet learnt, even we're now 30 or 40 years into the internet, we haven't yet quite learned how to control it, how to use it to protect our families. So should our children have these machines and access to this medium too early? Or should we delay it? Should school children be banned? So there's a private angle to this, like how on earth do we run our families like this, using AI, social media. But on a bigger issue in politics, we also still haven't quite learned how to use it. There are still big tycoons, I call them despots of data, who have too much power. And the companies have too much power. That needs to be limited. But at the same time, we haven't yet learned how to control the algorithms. And they're very, very easy to manipulate by outside players. We're seeing that in the Romanian election now in a very alarming manner. And we're seeing it also in the American elections, in British elections, and everywhere. So the big challenge is how to control this and how not to be manipulated by these things.
I was going to ask you if a history of manipulation would also be a viable history of humanity.
Yeah, that would also be a way of doing it, but it would be so common as not. I mean, all histories are a history of manipulation. This is certainly a history of many, many manipulations, of many lies, of many orthodoxies that turned out to be completely false and unhelpful. And one has to perhaps sort of, on one hand, one can say that it's a sign of a healthy democracy if big change can be chosen by ordinary people in a way that just shakes up everybody and disrupts everybody without violence. But at the same time, one has to reflect that the human capacity for self-mutilation is endless. And even recent history is filled with examples. I mean, I personally think Brexit is an example of that in Britain, where a prosperous country has in a short time brought total political chaos to itself for no reason whatsoever. And there's all sorts of things that we may learn about Brexit. I mean, if the disintegration of the European Union continues, it may turn out, when we look back, that we regard Brexit as an act of great wisdom by the British people. But at the moment, it looks like a terrible mistake. So yeah, I mean, we live in dangerous times. The risks we are taking could have consequences of which we have no idea. And that is the nature of history.
Also on this topic, what would you say that represents the biggest threat in properly knowing history today?
The biggest threat?
Yes.
I mean, the big threats are, about one is the use of the internet, which we've discussed. The internet is a fascinating phenomenon. But if we don't get control of it, it will destroy the institutions that we love. It is a great threat to everything. But the biggest threat is to the trust that is the basis of all capitalist democracies, from Romania to the United States. If it goes too far, it will destroy that. Another one is the cohesion in democracies that we've been talking about. Another one is nuclear weapons. And nuclear proliferation is obviously a real danger. Nuclear weapons, the nuclear powers is really held by about 8 or 9 countries at the moment, which is an amazing achievement. It's very few, considering that the technology is available widely. But many countries have peaceful nuclear programs now, maybe more like 40 countries. And those programs can easily be converted to military nuclear programs. So we could suddenly find ourselves with a much bigger nuclear community of countries that have nuclear weapons. And that is extremely dangerous. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will get nuclear weapons, for example. And other countries in that region may well get them. So that is a real danger. It used to be thought that no one would use a nuclear weapon, but actually the use of a tactical nuclear weapon will happen soon, somewhere. It's a bit like the famous example of the rifle that's on the wall in one of Chekhov's plays. If you go to a play and there's a rifle on the wall, it's going to be used in the play.
Sooner or later, yes.
And this will happen. So already I feel this is no longer a taboo. And then, of course, the other big challenge is migration and the disintegration of not just the international rule-based community, but also a disintegration of many of the states founded after decolonization, many of which are now proving unfit for purpose. And the combination of that and migration is the big challenge that everyone will face today.
For the end of our interview, I will go back to the idea of family, because there are horrific and many examples of famous families where one member was killed, injured, massacred, destroyed by another family member. How do you explain this?
Well, in all politics, we know that, the most dangerous person is the person closest to you. People are normally destroyed by a palace coup, a coup within their own ruling establishment. You know this in Romania from the fall of Ceausescu. It looked like a popular uprising, but it was also a political coup within the ruling clique. Mm-hmm. And this is very common. Throughout history, people say, look to danger to the person closest to you. And of course, this especially applies in family. And yes, in families where there is power, your rivals are those most closely related to you. In this sense, this book was always compared to the TV series Succession meets Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. And that's very true. So, the bigger the stakes, the more vicious the struggle. And of course, there were many systems where that struggle was encouraged. In all the monarchies of the Central Asian steppes, for example, the Mughals, the Ottomans, there was a system where, there was no heir. The eldest son was not the heir, and the sons were expected to fight for the throne. And those who lost were killed, and those who won were supposed to be stronger and more capable rulers for the state. So this is often built into the system. But even in modern dynasties, look at North Korea, for example. Kim Jong-un has recently assassinated his own half-brother. So yes, family life, when there's nothing at stake, can be extremely vicious, as we know, in the feuding relatives. But when there is something at stake, a great fortune, or a nation, an empire even, then the means are that much more violent because the stakes are that much greater. And that is the essence of life.
One would say that the contemporary democracies are or should be more deprived of this idea of family, of clans, of kinsmen, yet, and it is you to continue my sentence.
Yet, surprisingly, though we think of ourselves as living in a secular world where families and clans are no longer important in our rules-based democracies, in fact, family power and family life has never been more important. And families have never been more important politically. Not always in Western democracies, though in some of them that is the case, but especially in Africa and South America and in South Asia, where family power is the default measure. In China, for example, in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, I could go on. In all of these places, it has become absolutely natural in the 21st century to promote your own children. And of course, look at the greatest democracy on earth, America. I mean, Donald Trump, his closest advisors are his sons or his daughter or his son-in-law, and already as the administration is formed, major posts, already as the administration is formed, major posts are going to the father-in-laws of his own children. So, dynasty is dead? Hardly. Family history reflects an essential truth of human life, that family is the most trusted institution for every leader, and family power is not a thing of the past. It's growing and it's happening right now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Doamnelor, domnilor, ediția limitată de astăzi se închide aici. Sunt Marius Constantinescu, trăiți nelimitat!